And we got acquainted with some of the soldiers and, had fun talking to them. The cakes were heavy as lead. When he brought me home, he wanted to kiss me goodnight, and I said no. Every time my kids would see me chewing on ice, they'd think, oh, not another one. And she'll tell you about that. She remembers that. I really, really like to make other people happy. I love to do things that make other people happy.
So let's start out with, what's your full name?
Carol Rolene, not my maiden name, Belden Sorenson. I know that the Carol came from my grandmother,
Okay.
who I never met. She died before I was born. But she told my mother if it was a girl, she wanted me to be named Carol because it was going to be close to Christmas. I was supposed to be a Christmas Carol.
Oh, I like that.
So I'm so thankful to her for giving me that name. My mother named me my second name, which I've always disliked.
Where'd you grow up?
Inglewood, California.
Okay. How many siblings do you have?
Just one brother.
Just your one brother. And what's his name?
Jimmy.
Jimmy. What's the age difference?
6 years. I'm the older. We were very close as brother and sister. Very close. And I watched over him and he watched over me. And I remember him getting in a fight with a neighbor boy because the neighbor boy said something derogatory about me that Jimmy didn't like, and he got in a fight with that kid. My best memory, I guess, is with my best friend, Peggy, who lived next door to me. We were always together. She was a year older than I, and we did everything together. And then when she moved away, when we were in high school, she and her mother and grandmother moved away, and my mother and her mother kept us in touch through the years before we were adults, and then we kept in touch through the years, so we ended up being best friends all of our lives.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Well, there's one particular one, I think, that we were able to go on a train. We had never been on a train before, just the two of us, to my cousin's graduation from college. And I was very, very close to this cousin. I just adored her, and we both looked up to her as a princess. And she had made arrangements for us to spend the weekend with her in her dorm.
How old were you when you did that?
Probably 10 or 12. There were little things that happened in my childhood, in my young childhood, that probably are different from any children today, because certainly we had no television, we had no cell phones, we had a radio. And my parents and my brother and I would gather around the radio in the evening after dinner, and we'd listen to some radio shows, like Fibber McGee and Molly, The Shadow Knows. Let's see, I wrote some of them down. George Burns and Gracie Allen. Major Beau's Talent Show. I know you've never heard of that, but it was a big deal. And my friend Peggy and I, when she would have dinner with me or I with her at her house, we would have to do dishes afterward. We'd always sing together and we'd harmonize. We always said we were going to go on Major Beau's Talent Show. We always said we were going to do that. And then she and I liked to watch a series on the radio, watch it or hear it, on the radio called Hilltop House. It was a continued series every day of the week, and we'd be playing outside and my mom would call and say, "It's time for Hilltop House," and so we'd get to go in and watch that. And it was about an orphanage, children in an orphanage and their lives, and it was all the shows, all radio shows were for general audiences, and there were none rated R or PG or anything like that.
Do any Christmases stick out in your head, good or bad?
Yeah. I remember in my playhouse there was a little Christmas tree, and because it was my playhouse, I didn't think my brother should have anything in there. But they did put a Christmas present under the tree for him. And I was upset about that. I mean, I'm terribly embarrassed to say that. Even as a little kid, how could I have thought, been so selfish as not to want to share my playhouse with him? And Peggy and I were in that playhouse. I had little furniture in there and everything. And we both got Shirley Temple dolls for Christmas. And that probably was my favorite Christmas because that was what I wanted the most. And I still have that Shirley Temple doll.
Do you really?
Yes.
Oh, that's neat. Did you guys go on vacations?
Yes, we went camping.
Camping? Where'd you like to camp?
But my dad would always take us up to the San Bernardino Mountains.
Okay.
So there was always a place up there where we'd camp. I was probably only about 6 years old. It was probably before my brother was born. My mom told me this story. I don't remember it, but she said I was singing to the cows. There were cows down in the pasture, and I was singing a song to the cows. But camping was great, except for my dad used to like to take my brother and I fishing. It was not fun for Jimmy and me. It was not at all fun. And we'd never catch a fish. It seemed like we never caught a fish. So from that time on, I hated fishing.
Do you still not like fishing?
I don't like to fish. There was one time we did go on a vacation long after I was married. We had all 4 children. We went up to Fish Lake, Utah. It was very high in the mountains, very high in the mountains. The fish were really great because everybody, even Rob, he was probably about 5, was catching fish. And I was not having any part of it. So they all came running up to me, "Mama, you just have to come out and fish. Mama, you just have to, because you catch all kinds of fish. We're just catching every time we put a line out, we're catching a fish." And I said, "Oh, all right." And so I put on my coat and my gloves and everything and went out on that pier where they'd been fishing. And the fish swam across the lake, left. They saw me coming and they left. And I never caught one.
Tell me about your mom. What was her name?
Bernice. We called her Beast. Everybody called her Beast. She was a very, very loving, kind mom. And she played with us a lot. She baked wonderful pies. Her cakes were a big failure. Her cakes were heavy as lead. But she didn't have cake mixes in those days either.
Right.
But she made wonderful pies, and the neighbors would pay her to make a pie for them for Thanksgiving or something.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
What about your father? What's his name?
Earl.
Earl?
Lawrence Earl, but everybody called him Earl. He was not as attentive to the kids. In those days, I don't think fathers were. He was a very good provider. We went through the Depression. I was a little girl when we went through the Depression, and he had a job all through the Depression. He worked for Standard Oil, and so we never really lacked for anything. There was restrictions during the war, restrictions on what you could buy and what you couldn't, and limitations on things, and it was hard to get tires. It was hard to even buy meat at times. They were rationing meat and several different kinds of foods and things, because a lot of that was going to our troops wherever they were stationed. We had an army base right behind us where we lived. We had a row of houses on the street, and then behind that was a vacant lot, and they set up an army base for a barrage balloon. I don't know if you know what that is or not, but they send these balloons up, and they can determine if there's any enemy aircraft in the sky. It was during the Second World War. So they were there for probably a year or so, and we got acquainted with some of the soldiers and had fun talking to them.
Did you go to college?
I went one semester to Los Angeles City College, and then I got married, so that was the end of college education.
What was your husband's name?
Walter.
Walter. And where did you meet Walter?
Oh, that's a story in itself.
Okay.
My friend, we had the greatest place in the world, and I wish there were more places like that for young people now. Because it was a swimming pool, and it was shaped like a lake. It had lagoons and deep sections and shallow sections. Oh, it was very nice, and or you could put your blanket down on the sand. They had a sandy area near it, so you can lie in the sun, you know. And he was a lifeguard there. He just had gotten out of the Navy. Actually, when I met Walt at Pop's Little Lake was the place I'm talking about where I met him. And when I met him, he was with another guy who was very handsome. Walt was very handsome. You'll have to look at a picture of it. But I was more interested in this friend, and this friend asked me out, and I went on 2 dates with him. I went back to Pop's Little Lake, and we were going pretty much every weekend in the summertime. And Walt was there, but Jim wasn't there. So we talked some more, and then he asked me out, and that's when I started going with him. And I knew, once we went out, I knew he was the one. I think he was just so sweet. My dad was the kind of guy that would flare up and have a terrible temper, but I never saw that in Walt.
So how long did you guys date before you got married?
7 months.
7 months. Do you remember where he took you on your first date?
Oh my goodness. I should remember that, but I can't remember. But I do remember when he brought me home, he wanted to kiss me goodnight, and I said no. I said, we don't kiss on the first date. And I remember what he said. No skin off my nose. I do remember that, but I don't remember what the date was. And we actually went to the Palladium, which now is a bad word, I guess, down there, but it was a wonderful place in those days where all the big bands would come, and we got to dance to some of the big bands.
Where did you guys get married?
Pasadena, California.
And what's your anniversary date?
January 29th.
And how long were you married?
68 years.
68 years.
Almost, with less than 3 weeks of that, would have been 68 years. I have to tell you about one of the first meals I made for him. I was still working, and so it was a little bit hard to come home from work and prepare a meal, you know, as it is for all women who work. And so I made a casserole. It was a tuna casserole. They were popular in those days. And he was going to be a good husband and rave about my cooking, and he raved about this casserole, how good it was. I thought, well, gee, there's a lot of it left over. We'll just have that tomorrow for dinner, and I won't have to cook. And so I warmed it up for dinner the next day, and he still said, oh, this is really good, you know. And the third day it was still there. And I warmed it up the third time. He said, we're going out to dinner. So I did. The third time was a charm. I couldn't get him to eat it for 3 days in a row. And he didn't like casseroles from that day on. He did not want casseroles ever again.
So how long were you married before you had your first child?
9 months. Cynthia Dean.
How long after Cindy was born did you have another one?
Almost 3 years. I had a boy. Kim was the second one.
And then Valerie came how long after?
6 years after.
After Kim or after?
After Kim.
Okay, and then who's the baby?
Robert. They were all natural births. Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Rob was the biggest baby.
It's
Kim
like
was the
that.
smallest. He was a preemie.
What do you remember about being pregnant?
I like to chew on ice. It helped settle my stomach. And it's interesting because every time my kids would see me chewing on ice, they'd think, oh, not another one.
You said you guys went camping in Utah.
That was one place.
What other family vacations
Probably
did you do?
the best was in Colorado, except for that we had a little lightning storm when we were just going into the cabin. We just first got there, and a tree almost fell on Cindy as she was walking into the cabin. And she'll tell you about that. She remembers that.
That'd be hard to forget.
Yeah.
So he was a fireman. When did he retire? In the 80s or the 90s?
1980.
80.
So we moved up here right after he retired. He just loved woodworking, and it was very, very talented. There's a lot of woodworking things, that little birdhouse down there. He made all the Santa Clauses up on the shelf, the Christmas tree.
Those are gorgeous.
And made many more and that he gave away. He won a blue ribbon at the fair for a little elephant that he carved.
At the Kootenai Fair here or in
yes.
California? Oh, very cool. So.
Yep, he was a very busy guy out there in that shop. A couple years before our 50th, I told Cindy I hoped they would be planning something for our 50th wedding anniversary. So they had this big surprise party planned for us that we knew nothing about. And Walt and I knew we were going to go out to dinner for our anniversary, and we were to dress nicely, and so we did. And as I walked in the door, everybody said surprise, and I nearly fell backwards. So it was a wonderful surprise party. I mean, they couldn't have planned it nicer. It was very nice. We had friends there that we hadn't seen for a long time, and they had the tables all set beautifully and decorations, and they had hired somebody to play our special music. Big band music was our music. So she played big band music during the whole evening, and we could dance. All of our kids, one at a time, stood and paid a tribute to us. Well, actually, my daughter-in-law and my two daughters had gotten together and made a beautiful album for us. Pictures of my childhood, of Walt's childhood, of our adult, and there was a wedding picture in there, and there were pictures of the next generation. It was such a special time. I always have one of the happiest memories of my life. I think I'm patient. I do have a little Irish temper that I've had to get in control of. I really, really like to make other people happy. I love to do things that make other people happy.
What are you most proud of in your life?
My children.
If you were going to give your family advice, what would you tell them?
Well, I would probably tell them, try to pick your quarrels, not find fault with everything.
How many grandchildren do you have?
7.
7? Oh, that's not, I was thinking it was 4 kids that you were going to say like 20.